Alright, hello again everyone. So, today I'm going to cover a little bit of a alternative solution to something. So, I previously developed this code here that basically handled player collision with the enemy. So if I ran the program here and the enemy hit me, then you would basically see I would lose 1 life here, and this was implemented based on this flag and tracking how long the player was sort of invincible in this state here. Now, that was one way to sort of solve this problem of preventing the player from losing a bunch of lives every time the enemy interacted with it. But there might be a better solution, and so I'm going to show you at least an alternative solution to that. So I'm going to start from this Pygame 5.0 integrated enemy movement, which you can get on GitHub if you want. But if you see this, I think, yeah, there's actually, go back here. You know what, actually I'm going to start from this 5.1 file, player-enemy collision, which you can go get on our GitHub page if you don't have access to it. There's the URL right there, and you can see that's where you can get it. So let's go here and actually let's get rid of, well, let me save a copy here. I'll save this as an alternate solution. So if I go here, let's get rid of what we don't need. I don't think I'll need this player invincible or time the player has been invincible in seconds. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to delete this code about updating the invincibility status of the player because that's not needed. And then I'm not going to have this player invincible thing. Oops. So I need to unindent this code. And then I also will not need that code about the invincibility status. So now if I go back from here, this should sort of show the problem again. So I got hit by the enemy, and then, well, you may not be able to quite see it here, but now you can sort of see how I lost a bunch of lives even just for sort of one little collision there. So what if we want to solve that little problem there? That's what I'm going to present the alternative solution to here. So actually, if I go and run here, our program, and if you think about what's happening here, oops, shouldn't have paused it so much. So the issue here is that we're only subtracting lives anytime the enemy touches the player here. And so what that means that as the enemy continues to move over the player, it moves over it more than one frame, it's going to subtract a life every time as it moves over, but we only want it to happen to once. And so really what we want to do is be able to detect when the enemy sort of enters collision with the player and when it exits. And that might be a little bit more robust, a little more reliable than sort of the time-based movements that we had sort of going on before. Alright, so how do we implement that? Well, let's just sort of start writing some code that sort of describes what we want to have happen, and that should hopefully reveal what we want to do. So if the enemy touched the player here, this is the main thing we want to look at. We want to then check if enemy not... We want to check if the enemy was previously touching the player. And if so, then we subtract a life from the player. Otherwise, we do nothing. Now, so after we subtract a life from the player, then we want to track that the enemy is now previously touching the player. So we just take that Boolean variable, set that to true. Now I haven't defined that variable yet, so I'm going to go up here to the top and do like enemy previously touching player. Set that to false because the enemy generally shouldn't be touching the player initially. Then I go back down to this code here, and then I'm going to add some comments here to hopefully help explain what's going on here. So what we do is only subtract a life if the enemy was not already touching the player. If the enemy, so the enemy may be touching the player for several frames as it moves across the player. For each new time the enemy starts touching the player, only a maximum of 1 life should be lost. By tracking whether or not the enemy is touching the player or not, we can keep too many lives from being subtracted at once. So that's some basic comments there. You could probably make them a little bit better if you spent more time thinking about them. So the other thing we need to do is we need some way to sort of reset this flag, because if it never gets set back to false, then this condition is never going to get hit, and therefore the player lives will be set at only be decremented once. And let me actually kind of show you that. So now if I run the program, I lost a life once, and then I just need to get, yeah, so you saw I never lost another life. Well, that's because of what I was just describing to you. So else, if the enemy is no longer touching the player, then we can do this. Enemy has stopped touching the player. And then we set that to false. And then we can run this, and hopefully that should work. Oh, may not work. There we go. Lost another life. Let's see. There we go. So that generally, I think, seems to be working pretty well. Would be good to, test more to make sure that it really is. But there's a basic alternative solution. It might be a little simpler to understand than the other one. So there it is if you want to try them out. But it's good to have knowledge of both kind of solutions. So that's all for now.